In a world consumed by crime, when danger is outside, you run home. But imagine if the real horror was already inside your house. Imagine the safest place you know becoming the very place where you will be killed. In the early 1980s, one American state was living under a kind of fear people had never experienced before, a fear so deep that people stopped sleeping. Streets that were once full of life started emptying out before sunset. Families locked themselves inside their homes. Neighborhoods went silent. And slowly, something strange began happening across the state. Reports started coming out showing a massive rise in the demand for handguns, home defense weapons, locks, deadbolts, and security systems. Gun stores and locksmiths could barely keep up with the flood of customers. People were not buying these things because they wanted to feel powerful. They were buying them because they were terrified. Most homes in the state started keeping weapons inside, not for hunting, not for sport, but for one reason only: survival. But here is the part that made this case so disturbing. The real problem was not the number of victims. The real problem was that nobody understood who was doing this. Usually when people hear the word serial killer, they imagine someone attacking strangers outside, in dark alleys, parking lots, empty roads, or isolated places. But this story was different. This killer did not wait for people outside their homes. He went inside. He entered houses, killed the people living there, and disappeared without leaving a clear trace behind. No broken doors, no obvious forced entry, no simple explanation. The way these crimes were committed proved one terrifying thing. This man had been watching his victims closely. He knew their routines. He knew their houses. He knew who slept where, who stayed up late, and when the home would be most vulnerable. At the time, an American newspaper published an article about him with a headline so frightening that people kept repeating it for years. That headline said, "If the killer was able to get inside all of these homes, then who's to say he isn't standing outside your house right now, watching you?" And that sentence alone captured the fear of an entire state. Because this story did not begin with one massive crime that shook America overnight. It did not begin with a public attack that sent people running into the streets. No, it started quietly, almost calmly. The first reports began reaching police around December 31st, 1979. At first, they looked like separate incidents, small disturbances, strange complaints. Confused homeowners calling the police because something inside their house felt wrong. But then, investigators noticed something disturbing. The reports were coming from different cities, but the descriptions were almost identical. Someone was entering homes at night without breaking the door. Someone was moving through the house without stealing anything. Someone was killing the people inside and leaving without a clear trace. And the strangest part was that he seemed to already know the house before he ever stepped inside. Some victims, just days before they were killed, had already contacted the police. They reported that someone had entered their home, but nothing had been stolen. No money was missing, no jewelry was gone, no valuables had been taken. Instead, they described tiny, unsettling details that did not make sense at first. A window left open in a strange way. Objects moved from where they had been. A feeling that someone had been inside the house days earlier. Someone who had entered, walked around, touched things, and then left. No violence, no theft, no warning. At first, the police assumed they were dealing with a skilled burglar, maybe a professional thief who entered homes looking for something valuable. And if he did not find anything worth taking, he simply left. That explanation made sense at the beginning, but with time, the picture became far more complicated because every new detail pointed in the same direction. This was not about theft. This was not an ordinary criminal. Every new incident proved that something much darker was happening. Within a short time, people started talking about this unknown man in a way that felt almost supernatural. Not because they knew who he was. They knew nothing about him. And that was exactly what made him terrifying. Then the crimes began to appear more clearly, and police noticed one detail that changed the entire case. Some victims had filed reports days before they were murdered. They had called police saying they believed someone had entered their home. And yet, days later, some of those same people were found dead inside the same homes. And this is where the case became almost impossible, because not every report was real. Fear was spreading fast, and people were starting to imagine danger everywhere. Maybe the window had been left open by mistake. Maybe a family member had moved the object. Maybe the house only felt different because people were terrified. But the police could not ignore the calls, because sometimes the people who called were the next victims. So investigators were trapped. Hundreds of reports, dozens of houses, no fingerprints, no broken doors, no proof. And somewhere inside all that fear, there may have been a real man entering homes before he attacked. The more police compared the reports, the more one terrifying possibility appeared. Maybe he was not choosing his victims on the night of the crime. Maybe he was choosing them days before, watching them, testing them, entering their homes while they were gone, learning the rooms, the doors, the windows, the hallways, who slept where, who stayed awake late, who was alone, who was vulnerable. He was not breaking in to steal. He was breaking in to prepare. That was when people stopped seeing him as a normal criminal. A thief can be caught. A killer can make a mistake. But a man who enters your house, walks through your rooms, touches your things and leaves without you knowing, that is not just a criminal. To the people of California, that was a ghost. And the worst part was that police still did not know if this was one man or several people copying the same method. But the scariest question was not who, it was why. Why enter a home and do nothing? Why come back days later? Why turn someone's safest place into a trap? Then investigators discovered another detail. When he finally attacked, he was not rushed. He did not move like a panicked killer trying to escape. He entered the house, controlled the people inside, then moved through the rooms as if he owned the place. He opened the refrigerator, moved dishes, sat in the kitchen, sometimes for a long time, without saying a single word. The crime scene showed something deeply disturbing. This man was comfortable inside other people's fear. In one case, investigators found a timeline that made no sense. A family of 4. The father was killed in the living room around 8:01 p.m. The son was killed in the kitchen around 11:00 p.m. The mother and older son were killed later around 12:30 a.m. That means hours passed inside that house. Everyone had been tied up. Their eyes were not covered. They were forced to wait, forced to hear, forced to watch. And the question still remains, how did one man control an entire family for that long? Why did no one scream? Why did no one escape? Why did he stay? But some people survived. Some escaped by miracle. Some were rescued before they died. Some fought back. And when they did, he ran. And because of those survivors, investigators finally learned something important. This was not a gang, not a group, not a team. It was one man. One man was doing this. And that made the case even more terrifying. Because now the question was not whether a group could control a family. The question was, how could one man do it alone? The survivors also remembered something else. He was not always silent. Sometimes he made small sounds inside the house. And if he found a tape recorder, he would play a cassette he had brought with him. The music was loud, disturbing, in a language the victims did not understand, as if he wanted the people inside the house to stay trapped between fear and waiting. They did not know if the next sound would be footsteps, music, or death. That is what made this case different. The horror was not only the killing, the real horror was psychological. Because normally, when people are afraid, they run home. Home is supposed to be the safest place in the world. But in this story, when people ran home, he was already there. California's fear had reached a level never seen before in modern history. The terror became so overwhelming that law enforcement agencies issued public warnings in newspapers across the state. And then came the headline that terrified California more than anything else. Lock your bedroom door and do not come out, no matter what happens. Try to be the only survivor in your family. Read that sentence again, because hidden inside those words was a terrifying truth. People were no longer being taught how to stop the killer. They were being taught how to survive. Eventually, police decided to use his ego against him. They began releasing false information. They suggested someone had seen his face. They said he might be older. They said he might have special fighting skills. Then, they announced that he had threatened a specific neighborhood. The plan was simple: make him angry, make him feel challenged, make him attack an area police were already watching, then surround him, and finally catch him. But the killer, or someone pretending to be him, answered with chaos. False threats began spreading everywhere. One neighborhood, then 5, then 10, sometimes 20 in a single day. People slept inside their cars. Families left their homes. Neighbors gathered in the streets, believing there was safety in numbers. Police were stretched across too many places at once. For 8 days, California lived inside confusion. Then, on May 4th, 1986, he struck again. An elderly woman was killed inside her home. The house was left in chaos, and the message felt clear. I came in. I did what I wanted, and you still could not stop me. And then, nothing. No new crimes. No reliable reports. No clear sign that he was still active. Months passed, then years. The man who had terrified California simply disappeared. Some said he died. Some said he left the state. Some believed he had taken his own life. But police feared the darkest possibility. Maybe he had not disappeared at all. Maybe he had simply decided to stop. And if he could stop whenever he wanted, then maybe he could come back whenever he wanted. The case became cold. The file was buried. The killer had no name. But the fear did not disappear. Years later, some people still slept with weapons beside them. Some families never felt safe inside their homes again. Some left California and never returned, because even after he vanished, he left something behind. Not evidence, not fingerprints. Fear inside the mind of everyone who lived through it. Then, in 2006, almost 20 years after the case went cold, a journalist named Michelle McNamara reopened the nightmare. To most people, it was an old story. To her, something was missing, a detail, a connection, a mistake nobody had noticed. She began collecting interviews, reading old police reports, studying maps, and connecting crimes that had been separated for years. She was not only studying the murders, she was studying the mind behind them. Michelle noticed something simple but powerful. The crimes had different names. Different police departments used different labels. Different files were scattered across different cities. Everyone was chasing the same shadow, but calling it by different names. So she gave him one, the Golden State Killer. And suddenly, the story had a single face, a single shadow, and a single name people could remember. But the case consumed her, the sleepless nights, the obsession, the need to understand how this man had escaped for so long. Before she could see the answer, Michelle McNamara died on April 21st, 2016. Her death shocked everyone following the case. Some people could not accept the timing. The woman digging into California's darkest cold case was suddenly gone. But investigators found no proof that her death was connected to the killer. And for a moment, it felt like the case had died with her. But her work did not disappear. Her husband and collaborators helped finish and publish her book, and when it came out, it pushed the case back into public attention. The book described the killer's behavior, his patterns, his methods, and the crimes truly connected to him. It was almost like a map, not a map of streets, a map of fear. And at the same time, DNA technology had become more powerful than ever. For the first time, investigators had a new way to hunt a ghost. They were no longer searching only for fingerprints. They were no longer waiting for a witness. They used genetic genealogy. Instead of looking directly for the killer, they looked for his relatives. A genetic match, a family connection, a branch on a family tree that could lead back to the man himself. At first, it was only a weak possibility among thousands of names. But with every comparison, the circle became smaller. The ghost was becoming a man. Then, after more than 40 years, the shadow finally had a name: Joseph James DeAngelo. And the most disturbing part was not just who he was, it was what he used to be. A former police officer, the man who made people lock their doors, buy weapons, and fear the night, had once been part of the system that was supposed to protect them. He was not hiding in a forest. He was not living in the dark. He was living like an ordinary man in an ordinary neighborhood behind an ordinary door. On April 24th, 2018, in Sacramento, California, police arrested Joseph James DeAngelo outside the life he had been hiding inside. He was 72 years old, an old man, quiet, ordinary. Nothing like the monster victims had carried in their minds for decades. And that made it even harder for some survivors to accept, because the face of their nightmare looked like someone's neighbor, someone's grandfather, someone you might pass on the street without looking twice. In court, survivors spoke with shaking voices. Some could barely finish their statements. For years, they had lived with the sound of his steps, the fear of his return, and the feeling that their own homes had betrayed them. Now, the ghost was sitting in front of them, old, silent, human. The court sentenced him to life in prison. 13 murders, dozens of assaults, more than 100 break-ins and burglaries. And those were only the crimes the court could prove.